The ground trembled beneath Nera's feet as the beast roared, a deep, bone-shaking sound that echoed across the dunes. The sky above burned orange, the sun half hidden behind swirling sandstorms, and the air felt electric with tension. Nera's heart raced. The creature Thal'nar was waking up, and she was the reason. But the men in the camp didn't know that yet. "Move! Get it under control!" shouted a Dominion officer, his voice cutting through the chaos. Soldiers scrambled, frantically pushing buttons on their handheld devices, trying to subdue the enormous sand beast, now thrashing against its restraints. Chains, glowing with energy, strained under the weight of the creature's fury. But Thal'nar was growing stronger by the second. Nera crouched behind a dune, her hands trembling as she watched the scene unfold. She could feel Thal'nar's mind reaching out to hers, the connection between them deepening, pulling her into its thoughts. Pain, rage, fear. The beast's emotions slammed into her with raw intensity, nearly knocking her off balance. This was a mistake, a terrible, wonderful mistake. When she had first come to the Dominion's camp, it had been a desperate gamble. Her people, what remained of them, were hiding in the mountains, running from the endless advance of the Dominion's soldiers. They had taken the sand beasts, the protectors of the desert, and turned them into weapons. Machines of war used to wipe out entire alien tribes. Nera had hoped to free just one beast, to show it compassion, to remind it of what it once was. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Thal'nar to respond to her, to bond with her. Another thunderous roar tore through the camp as Thal'nar reared up, its massive body towering over the human soldiers, who scrambled beneath it like insects. The chains were faltering, the energy flickering. It wouldn't be long before Thal'nar broke free. And when that happened, the devastation would be unimaginable. Nera's breath caught in her throat as she remembered the stories her mother used to tell her as a child. Stories of the sand beasts, the great guardians of the desert. Back then, they were revered, not controlled. Back then, they roamed the dunes freely, their massive forms carving paths through the sand, protectors of life. Now, they were little more than tools, enslaved by technology, broken. "I can't let this happen," Nera whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. With a final glance at the camp, she sprang into action, her feet kicking up sand as she darted from the dune toward the nearest tent. The soldiers were too focused on the beast to notice her at first, but she knew she only had moments before someone spotted her. She wasn't a fighter, she had no weapons, no combat training, but she had something stronger. The bond, the connection. She had to reach Thal'nar before the soldiers overpowered it. Ducking between tents, Nera could hear the shouts growing louder. The beast was losing control, its roars now filled with desperation. Nera's pulse quickened as she closed the distance between her and the beast, her mind racing. How could she reach him? How could she help? Suddenly, an alarm blared, and Nera froze. One of the soldiers had seen her. "There! Intruder!" a voice shouted, followed by the click of a plasma rifle charging up. Nera didn't wait to see who it was. She bolted, sprinting toward the massive silhouette of Thal'nar, now barely restrained by the glowing chains that pulsed with energy. "Stop her!" another voice shouted, but it was too late. Nera reached the edge of the platform where Thal'nar stood, his eyes, bright and burning with rage, locked onto hers. "Thal'nar," she thought, reaching out with her mind, pushing her emotions toward him. "I'm here. I'm with you. You're not alone." The beast let out a low, guttural growl, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow. The soldiers' shouts became muffled, the world around her blurring. It was just her and the beast. She could feel the connection between them deepening, a thread of understanding weaving its way through her thoughts. "I can't let them keep you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't belong to them. You never did." Suddenly, the chains snapped. The energy restraints that had held Thal'nar in place shattered, and with a roar that shook the earth, the beast leaped forward, its massive claws tearing through the platform. The soldiers scattered, shouting in panic as the creature broke free, its body crashing down onto the sand. Dust and debris filled the air as Thal'nar swung its head, sending equipment and tents flying. Nera stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had freed him. But there was no time to celebrate. The soldiers were regrouping, and plasma blasts began raining down around her. The heat from the blasts singed the air, making it hard to breathe. Nera ducked behind a broken piece of equipment, her mind racing. She couldn't outrun them. Not like this. Thal'nar, she called out mentally, hoping the beast could still hear her. I need you. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ground beneath her shifted, and Nera looked up to see Thal'nar towering over her, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He was calm now, his rage tempered by her presence. Come, he seemed to say, the word forming in her mind. Without hesitation, Nera climbed onto the beast's back, her hands gripping the rough, scaly skin as Thal'nar turned toward the desert horizon. The wind whipped through her hair as the beast began to move, its massive legs carrying them both away from the camp, away from the soldiers, and into the vast, untamed wilderness. As they raced across the sands, Nera could feel the bond between them solidifying, growing stronger with each passing moment. She wasn't just riding the beast, she was part of it now. Their minds were linked, their fates intertwined, but she knew the Dominion wouldn't let them escape so easily. This was only the beginning. The hunt was on. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the sun hanging low in the sky like a distant, dying star. The wind howled, carrying with it the sting of sand, but Nera felt only the rhythm of Thal'nar's strides beneath her as they raced across the dunes. The connection between them had deepened in a way she hadn't expected. She could feel his power, his ancient knowledge pulsing through her mind, even as her thoughts whispered to him, guiding him away from the Dominion forces that surely followed. They won't stop, will they? She muttered to herself, glancing back over her shoulder at the empty horizon. But even as the distance between them and the camp grew, she knew the Dominion's relentless pursuit was only beginning. Thal'nar rumbled softly beneath her, a deep, resonant sound she could feel more than hear. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense of strength that steadied her nerves. Still, her mind raced with uncertainty. Her people were hiding in the mountains, far from here, unaware of what she had done. And the Freeborn, those elusive nomads who had once offered her people aid, hadn't been seen in weeks. Could she even find them in this endless desert? They are close, came the thought from Thal'nar, a brief but certain pulse in her mind. Nera frowned, but before she could question him, a shape appeared on the horizon. It was subtle at first, just a blur against the sky, but as they drew closer, she realized it was a structure, half buried in the sand, barely visible through the heat waves. Is that? Nera's voice trailed off, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a structure, it was a caravan. The Freeborn. As they approached, Thal'nar slowed, his massive body sinking into the sand with each step. Nera's heart raced as she saw figures moving between the weathered tents and vehicles. These weren't Dominion soldiers. These were humans dressed in light desert clothing, their movements swift and purposeful. She slid off Thal'nar's back and landed softly in the sand, her legs trembling from the long ride. The sun bore down on her, the heat almost unbearable, but she forced herself to take a few steadying breaths as she approached the caravan. A man stepped forward from the group, his face weathered by years in the desert, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes locked onto Nera's, sharp and assessing. He wore the traditional garb of the Freeborn, a flowing tunic that blended into the sand, with a light cloak draped over his shoulders to protect him from the sun. A plasma rifle was slung across his back, and his posture was tense, ready for a fight. Nera, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. I didn't expect to see you out here. Not like this. She met his gaze, her chest tight with nerves. Kael. Kael? The leader of the Freeborn. He had once been a Dominion soldier, like all of them, before he turned against the regime and disappeared into the desert. Her people had traded with his tribe for years, relying on their knowledge of the sands to survive. But she had never expected to see him like this, standing before her as the only hope she had left. We don't have much time, Nera said quickly, glancing behind her. The Dominion, they're coming. They'll be here soon. Kael's gaze shifted to Thal'nar, towering behind her, his massive body casting a long shadow over the desert. There was no fear in Kael's eyes, only curiosity. I can see that. Nera swallowed, her heart pounding. I bonded with him. I didn't mean for this to happen. But the Dominion, they were going to use him. They were going to use all of them. Kael's expression darkened, and he crossed his arms over his chest. And now they'll hunt you to the ends of the desert for it. I know. Nera's voice wavered, but she held her ground. But we can't let them win. Thal'nar isn't just a weapon, he's sentient. He's alive. I can feel it. Kael nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the sand beast. I believe you. Nera blinked, surprised. You do? Kael let out a short, humorless laugh. You think I haven't seen what they've been doing to this planet? The Dominion doesn't care about life, only power. They'll destroy anything they can't control. He turned back toward the caravan, gesturing for Nera to follow. We've known for a long time that the sand beasts were more than animals. The elders warned us, but the Dominion wouldn't listen. They only see what they want to see. As they walked, Nera's thoughts whirled. Kael's words confirmed what she had feared. The Dominion's cruelty extended beyond just her people. The planet itself was suffering under their rule. But something else gnawed at her, something she hadn't voiced yet. They'll come after you too, she said quietly. If they find out you're helping me. Kael glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Let them come. They reached the center of the caravan, where a group of Freeborn were gathered around a large, makeshift table. Weapons, supplies, and maps were strewn across the surface. The group quieted as they saw Nera approach, their eyes flicking between her and Thal'nar, who had settled on the outskirts of the camp, his massive form blending into the dunes like a living part of the landscape. Is it true? One of the Freeborn asked, her voice tense. Have you really bonded with the beast? Nera nodded. Yes. He's more than just a beast. He's alive. The woman frowned, her expression unreadable. Then we have to protect him. Kael raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the woman's support. We do, but that won't be easy. The Dominion will stop at nothing to get him back. Another man spoke up, his voice laced with uncertainty. Maybe we should just give them what they want. We can't fight them and win. Kael, we're barely surviving as it is. Kael shot the man a hard look. We won't survive if we keep running. The Dominion will hunt us all down eventually, beast or no beast. We need to take a stand. The man opened his mouth to argue, but Nera stepped forward, her voice stronger than she expected. If we give them Thal'nar, they'll just keep taking. They won't stop until everything is gone, until this entire planet is drained of life. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The Freeborn exchanged uncertain glances, but none of them spoke. Kael, however, nodded in agreement. We fight, he said, his voice firm. We protect the beasts. We protect the planet. Nera's heart swelled with hope. For the first time since she had bonded with Thal'nar, she felt like she wasn't alone. She had allies. She had a chance. But as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, she knew that their time was running out. The Dominion would come for them soon. And when they did, they would have to be ready. The desert was quiet, too quiet. Nera stood at the edge of the Freeborn camp, her eyes scanning the endless horizon of shifting dunes. Thal'nar rested nearby, his enormous form blending into the sand like a natural part of the landscape. The calm should have been a relief after the frantic escape from the Dominion, but something felt off. The air was thick with tension, and even Thal'nar stirred uneasily, his massive head lifting to sniff the wind. Kael appeared beside her, his brow furrowed as he adjusted the plasma rifle slung over his shoulder. They should have been here by now, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. The scouts were supposed to report back at dawn. Nera glanced at him, her heart sinking. What if they ran into trouble? The Dominion could have caught them. Kael shook his head. Our scouts know how to avoid detection. It doesn't make sense. Before Nera could respond, The sound of hurried footsteps reached her ears. One of the Freeborn fighters, breathless and wide-eyed, rushed toward them, his face pale under the desert sun. "They're here," he gasped. "The Dominion. They've surrounded us." Nera's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively reached out to Thal'nar through their bond. The beast's awareness surged in her mind. He felt the danger too. A growing threat creeping closer with every second. Kael cursed under his breath. How did they find us? The camp's supposed to be hidden. The answer came in the form of another figure stepping into the clearing. It was Jarek, one of the Freeborn, who had been growing increasingly nervous over the past few days. His face was a mask of guilt, and his eyes refused to meet Kael's or Nera's. You led them here," Kael growled, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped toward Jarek, fists clenched. "You sold us out." Nera's stomach twisted. Jarek had been one of the few to speak out against fighting the Dominion, arguing that they were too strong. That surrender was the only option. She had sensed his fear, but she hadn't expected this. I didn't have a choice," Jarek stammered, backing away from Kael. They promised they wouldn't hurt us if we handed over the beast. I was just trying to protect us." "Protect us?" Kael's voice was rising now, filled with anger. "You've doomed us all." Nera stepped between them, her voice calm but urgent. "We don't have time for this. We need to get everyone out of here. Now." Kael glared at Jarek for a moment longer before turning his attention to Nera. "You're right. We can't stay and fight here. We'll have to fall back to the ravine." But Nera's mind was already racing. If the Dominion had surrounded the camp, escape wouldn't be easy. And if they wanted Thal'nar, they wouldn't stop until they had him. "We won't make it out with everyone," Nera said, her voice heavy with realization. "They'll cut us down before we can reach safety." Kael's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting?" Nera swallowed hard, her mind flashing to her bond with Thal'nar. The connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and she knew, deep down, that there was a way to fight back. But it would be dangerous. The thought of tapping into the full extent of Thal'nar's power terrified her. "I can lead them away," she said quietly. "Thal'nar and I will draw their attention. Give the rest of you time to escape." Kael's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, that's suicide. It's the only way," Nera insisted, her heart pounding. "They want Thal'nar. If we can lure them away from the camp, they'll follow us. You'll have a chance to regroup and get to safety." Kael's gaze softened, his anger giving way to something else, concern, maybe even fear. "Nera, I'll be fine," she lied, her voice steady. "I have Thal'nar. We'll make it." There was a long, tense silence. Kael's eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of doubt, but he found none. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained grim. "All right," he said, "but if anything happens, it won't." Nera cut him off, a small, determined smile tugging at her lips. "Trust me." With that, she turned to Thal'nar, who had been watching the exchange with silent understanding. The beast's massive eyes met hers, and through their bond, she could feel his readiness, his willingness to protect her, to fight if necessary. "Let's go," she whispered to him. And without hesitation, Thal'nar lowered his head, allowing her to climb onto his back. The camp was already in chaos, Freeborn fighters scrambling to gather supplies and prepare for evacuation. Nera could hear the distant sound of approaching vehicles. Dominion forces were closing in fast. As Thal'nar rose to his full height, Nera felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth. She gave Kael one last look, and he raised a hand in a silent farewell. Then, with a nudge of her thoughts, she urged Thal'nar forward. The beast roared, his powerful legs kicking up sand as they charged toward the distant horizon, away from the camp. The Dominion's forces, sensing their prey, immediately shifted their focus. Nera could see the dust trails of their vehicles moving to intercept them, and her heart raced. They were coming for her, for Thal'nar, but she wouldn't let them win. Not now. Not ever. As the wind whipped through her hair and the desert stretched out before her, Nera felt something deep inside her stir, a power she hadn't known she possessed. It wasn't just Thal'nar's strength she could feel now. It was something more. Something ancient. Something unstoppable. The Dominion was about to learn just how wrong they had been. The desert stretched out endlessly before Nera and Thal'nar, a vast expanse of sand and stone bathed in the harsh light of the setting sun. The wind howled in their ears as they raced across the dunes, the Dominion's forces closing in behind them. Nera could hear the hum of their engines, the distant crackle of their plasma weapons. They were coming for her. For Thal'nar, just as she had planned. But what they didn't know was that they were walking into a trap. Nera's heart pounded as she clung to Thal'nar's rough, scaly back. Her thoughts focused on the connection between them. She could feel his strength, his power, coursing through her. But there was something more now, something deep within Thal'nar, an ancient force that had been sleeping for centuries, now stirring, awakening. Ahead, the sand dunes began to rise into jagged cliffs. Nera's mind raced. The ravine. If they could reach the ravine, they could make their stand there. The narrow passage would force the Dominion's forces to bottleneck, giving Thal'nar the upper hand. It was their only chance. Thal'nar, she thought, pushing her mind into his. We need to reach the ravine. Can you make it? The beast responded with a low rumble, his strides quickening as they charged forward, sand flying up in clouds around them. Nera could feel his confidence, his trust in her, and it bolstered her own resolve. Together, they were stronger than anything the Dominion could throw at them. But as they neared the cliffs, the first plasma blast streaked past them, narrowly missing Nera's head. She ducked instinctively, her heart leaping into her throat. The Dominion's vehicles were faster than she had anticipated. They're getting closer, she whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Thal'nar roared in response, his massive form surging forward with renewed energy. Nera glanced back over her shoulder and saw the dust clouds rising from the Dominion's approaching forces. There were more of them than she had expected, dozens of armored vehicles, each armed with heavy weaponry. The sun reflected off their metal hulls, turning them into gleaming beacons of destruction. For a moment, fear gripped her. How could they possibly stand against this? But then Thal'nar's voice filled her mind. Calm and steady, trust me. Nera nodded, her grip tightening on his back. She had no choice but to trust him now. As they reached the edge of the ravine, Thal'nar skidded to a stop, his claws digging into the sand. The drop was steep, a narrow chasm that cut through the desert floor like a jagged wound. The only way across was a narrow path, barely wide enough for a single vehicle at a time. Perfect. Nera slid off Thal'nar's back and landed softly on the ground, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the roar of the Dominion's engines growing louder, the metallic clink of weapons being prepared. They would be here any moment. This is it, she thought, sending the message to Thal'nar. We make our stand here. The beast lowered his massive head, his eyes glowing with a fierce light. Nera could feel the power radiating off him, the ancient force that had been stirring within him since the moment they bonded. It was stronger now, more focused. It was ready. The first of the Dominion's vehicles crested the dune, its weapons trained on them. Nera's breath caught in her throat as the plasma cannon on the vehicle's roof hummed to life, charging up for a deadly shot. Now, she shouted, and in an instant, Thal'nar moved, with a deafening roar. The sand beast surged forward, his massive claws tearing into the ground as he charged toward the incoming vehicles. The first blast from the Dominion's cannon struck the sand, where Thal'nar had been standing moments before. But the beast was too fast, too powerful. He leaped into the air, his massive body colliding with the vehicle, sending it tumbling down the ravine in a shower of sparks and debris. Nera watched in awe as Thal'nar tore through the Dominion's forces, his strength unmatched by anything the humans could muster. The other vehicles screeched to a halt, their drivers frantically trying to reverse course. But it was too late. Thal'nar was upon them, his roars echoing through the ravine like thunder. Plasma fire erupted from the remaining vehicles, But Nera could see that the soldiers were panicking. Their shots were wild, scattered, ineffective against the sheer power of the sand beast. One by one, the vehicles fell, overturned, crushed, or sent careening into the depths of the ravine by Thal'nar's fury. But as Nera watched the battle unfold, something strange began to happen. The ground beneath her feet trembled, not from the force of the fighting, but from something deeper, something within the planet itself. She could feel it through her connection to Thal'nar, a growing energy that pulsed through the earth like a heartbeat. "What? What is this?" she whispered, her eyes widening in realization. The power wasn't just coming from Thal'nar, it was coming from the desert itself. The bond between Nera and the sand beast had awakened something ancient, something that had been dormant for centuries. The sand beasts weren't just guardians of the desert, they were its protectors, its lifeblood. And now, with the bond restored, the planet was fighting back. Thal'nar roared again, and this time, the ground responded. The sand beneath the Dominion's remaining vehicles shifted, pulling them downward as if the desert itself had come alive. Nera could only watch in awe as the vehicles were swallowed by the dunes, disappearing into the earth without a trace. The Dominion soldiers screamed in terror, abandoning their weapons and fleeing in every direction. But it was no use. The desert had claimed them. The battle was over. Nera stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the power of the planet pulsing through her. Through Thal'nar, through everything around them, the bond between them had awakened something far greater than she had ever imagined. Slowly, Thal'nar approached her, his massive form casting a long shadow over the ravine. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, she understood. The sand beasts were more than just creatures. They were the guardians of the planet, protectors of a balance that had been disrupted by the Dominion's greed. "We did it," she whispered, her voice shaking with awe. "We saved them." But even as the words left her lips, she knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion would return, stronger than ever. They would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. But now, Nera had the power of the sand beasts on her side, and she would fight to protect them. To protect her people, to protect the planet that had given them life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a warm, golden glow, Nera and Thal'nar stood together at the edge of the ravine, watching as the last remnants of the Dominion's forces disappeared into the sands. The desert was silent once more, but Nera knew that the fight was far from over.